All right, now we're on to the macro page. This is the page you're probably going to use the most often because it allows you to scope and do your takeoffs very, very quickly. First thing I want to bring to your attention though is that this section right here where it says if you completed all of your items on the per room page, which you would have done previously, you can actually skip this particular section and you can scroll down to where it says next and select that button right there, and then you can go on to the next part of the form. But let's assume that you haven't done that, and or you're going to use a combination of both the macro form and the per room form, which does happen quite often. For example, if you've got 4 rooms that are basically gutted at 2 feet and 1 room that was only partially affected, you would use a combination of the 2 forms as you see fit. Second thing you need to pay attention to is this question mark here, like we discussed earlier. This is going to give you an outline of exactly what's going on with the macro form and sort of how it's designed and how it works. So let's go into that help real quick and we'll have a look at this. So here's the help. You'll notice that the most important thing as you read through this is that emergency macro form assumes all of the following occurred during an emergency. So we assume when you did the emergency that you extracted, you pressure washed, you applied antimicrobial, you removed insulation, baseboard, flooring, appliance, toilets, toe kicks, the whole kit and caboodle out of there. And we also recognize that you would have removed them from the applicable areas. So for example, if you had a bedroom that was gutted at 2 feet and down, and that bedroom was on an outside wall, or let's say 2 outside walls, we recognize that 50% of the walls do not contain insulation and 50% do. So we would make the adjustments on that based on the sketch and the photos that you've provided. So let's give you a quick example, if we can, of exactly what and how the form works. So let's imagine for a second that you had a loss and it was in a basement. Again, we'll use that as an example. And let's assume that you removed 100% of the materials at, let's say, 2 feet and down. That's a pretty standard thing. That didn't work. Hang on. 2 feet and down. That would be a pretty typical thing that you guys would do when you're out doing emergencies. And then in the rooms that you did that in, we'll just select those. We'll say the bathroom. We'll say a bedroom. Let's say we had a second bedroom. Let's say we had the 2 closets in the bedroom. Let's say we had a family room and a hallway. We now know, based on what you just put in, that 100% of the materials are removed 2 feet and down in the rooms that you selected. And that's basically all we need in order to do a proper estimate on all of those rooms. The only second thing that we need to add, or additional things we need to add, are some of the finer points. So let's just use some examples here. Let's start with the ceiling. So let's say that the ceiling was affected, but it wasn't removed because you didn't need to remove it, you were able to dry it out, but it's going to need to be addressed on the rebuild. So you would put in there that the ceiling was affected, and you're going to put in that it was affected by 100% because we're going to have to rescape the whole ceiling in all of those areas. Let's assume that you also had some casings removed, and let's assume that you had 5 doors and you removed all of the casings out of all the 5 doors. Well, if you add up 34 for casings times 5 doors, that gives you 170 feet of casings, and remove that. And let's assume that the jambs were also affected, but they weren't removed. So we affected it, but we didn't remove them because we're going to do it on the rebuild. So we just put 170 there as well, because of course the jambs would line up with the casings. And we now know that you didn't remove them on the emergency, but they'll have to be removed and replaced on the rebuild. So you get the idea on how that works. The other thing we want to touch about real quick as well is the macro exclusions. All right. As you can see, there's another question mark there. And if we open that up, it sort of explains to you what's going on. So what that basically means is that, let's say, for example, out of that macro list you did not remove or did not do something that was part of that macro list, and we use the example of pressure wash in this instance, then you simply put pressure wash in the macro exclusions box. And we now know that you did not do any pressure washing during the emergency in those rooms, so that we know not to include it as part of the estimate. The other nice thing about this form is that you can actually add additional macros, and this works out really, really effectively once you get the hang of it, because what basically happens is that if you've got rooms that were all, say for example, as we did up here, removed at 100 feet, or excuse me, 100% at 2 feet and down, you can just put those rooms in. So let's assume this is sort of part 1 of a macro, and then on the other part of the form, or excuse me, the other part of the basement, you did additional work in different rooms. So let's say you did in the basement again and you removed only 50% of the walls at 2 feet and down. And instead of in those rooms, let's say you did it in the furnace room and the family room and the rear entry. We now have a separate macro for those 3 rooms, and again you just simply go through, add your casings if there was any casings removed or affected, how many linear feet there was, and then same with cabinets. We can add cabinets, they were affected but not removed because we didn't want to destroy the bathroom this time, and you tell me the linear feet of cabinets it is, and on and on you go. So you can sort of get the idea of what's going on. Like I said, it's a little bit to play around with. It's a little hard to sort of explain in this type of situation because I don't want to take up too much of your time, but you kind of get what the gist of it is. And then once you've done everything you need to do in the macros, you simply click on next and it takes you to the final form.